On the evening of March 6, 1981, Joseph and Betty Selby pulled out of the parking lot of the Friendly Inn restaurant in Ellicott City, Maryland, planning to head home for a quick nap before coming back later that night to hear a bluegrass band play. They'd been married for almost 40 years, and Joseph was the longtime manager of the Enchanted Forest theme park who, according to neighbors, gave just about everybody in town a job. They were pillars of their community, but that night, Joseph and Betty would never make it back to the Friendly Inn because by 9:40 p.m., as they slept in their bed, someone set their home on fire. 45 years later, no one has been arrested for their murders, and police now believe they died over something as simple as a mailbox. Joseph Nicholas Selby Jr. was 56 years old in 1981 and was, by every account, the heart of his community. He managed the Enchanted Forest, a beloved fairy tale-themed amusement park off Route 40 in Ellicott City that had been delighting Maryland families for decades. According to Howard County cold case detective Wade Zufall, Joseph had actually studied under Walt Disney himself in California before bringing that magic back home to Maryland. Friends and family said the Enchanted Forest was basically his pride and joy. His wife, Betty, was 51 and had been married to Joe for almost 4 decades, and together they were known as kind, generous, hardworking people who took care of those around them. To understand what happened to them on the night of March 6, 1981, we have to go back 6 years earlier to 1975. That year, Joseph and Betty's nephew, Johnny Selby Jr., got into a bar fight at a bar in Mount Airy, Maryland. During the fight, Johnny was stabbed multiple times and almost died. The man who attacked him was eventually convicted, sent to prison for a few years, and then released, at which point he set out for revenge. Now, fast forward to March 6, 1981. Joseph and Betty had spent the day going about their normal lives, and that evening, they met up with friends at the Friendly Inn, a local restaurant on Frederick Road in Ellicott City, to share a couple of drinks. According to Detective Zufall, they had told their friends their plans for the night. They were going to run home, take a nap, and come back later to listen to a bluegrass band that was scheduled to play. With that, the couple headed home, just a short distance away on Frederick Road, and lay down to rest before their evening out. Around 9:40 that night, while they were asleep in their beds, someone slipped onto their property and set their house on fire. Tragically, Joseph and Betty died of smoke inhalation and likely never even woke up. So how does a couple beloved by their entire community, with no enemies of their own, end up the targets of an arson fire? That's where the mailbox comes in. According to Howard County Police, 2 independent witnesses came forward and told investigators that someone had been seen looking for a man named Johnny Selby Jr. That, of course, was Joseph and Betty's nephew, the same Johnny who had been stabbed in that bar fight back in 1975. And here is where it gets really, really sad. Johnny Selby Jr. did, in fact, live on Frederick Road, but his house was about a mile down the road from Joseph and Betty's. The mailbox in front of Johnny's house read simply J. Selby, but the mailbox in front of Joseph and Betty's house, it read J. N. Selby Jr. Now, anyone who knew the family knew that those initials stood for Joseph Nicholas Selby Jr. But to a stranger driving up Frederick Road, looking for a man named Johnny J. N. Selby Jr. probably looked close enough. Because of this, the police and the Selby family believed that the man released from prison after stabbing Johnny in 1975 came back to Frederick Road looking for revenge. He found a mailbox with the right-looking initials, lit the fire, and walked away, never knowing he had just killed 2 innocent people who had nothing to do with that bar fight at all. For more than 40 years, this case sat cold. The man police suspected was never publicly named, and despite the strength of the theory, prosecutors didn't have what they needed to charge anyone. As for the Enchanted Forest, it closed in 1995, more than a decade after Joseph's death. In 2021, on the 40th anniversary of the murders, the Howard County Police Department made a public push to revive the case, hoping that someone would finally come forward, but they never did. In 2025, the lead detective on the case announced that they had recovered DNA from evidence in the case, but at this time it hasn't been linked to a specific killer. If you have any information about the murders of Joseph and Betty Selby, please call the Howard County Police Department at 410-313-STOP or email tips to hcpdcrimetips@howardcountymd.gov. Callers can remain anonymous, and the reward is up to $30,000. Joseph and Betty Selby were murdered on March 6, 1981, and as of May 2026, no one has been arrested, and this case remains unsolved. On the morning of April 26, 1976, 18-year-old Deborah Nadine Scott waved goodbye to her mother and her younger sister as they left their Woodlawn, Maryland apartment for the day. She was a freshman at Morgan State University, the valedictorian of her high school class, and a young woman who, by every account, just genuinely loved people. She was supposed to head to class that morning, but she never made it. By that afternoon, Deborah would be dead, and 50 years later, her mother would still be waiting for answers. Deborah Nadine Scott was born in Maryland and was, in the words of her mother, Jean Hayes, a good girl who liked being around people. Friends and family described her as a warm and dependable individual who was genuinely interested in helping others. After graduating high school, she enrolled at Morgan State University, where she was studying general education and leaning toward a future career as a psychiatrist or psychologist. She chose Morgan State specifically because she wanted to remain close to home, living with family. Jean also said her daughter loved to sing in the church choir, a memory she still cherishes. On the morning of the tragedy, on Wednesday, April 26, 1976, Deborah's day started out like any other. Jean had left for her job at the post office, and Deborah's younger sister Cheryl headed off to high school. Deborah, who had a later start, stayed back at the apartment and was expected to head to class shortly after. The last time Deborah was seen alive was at 9:15 a.m. What happened in the hours after that has remained a mystery for half a century. Around 3:30 that afternoon, Jean got a call at work. It was Cheryl, and she was crying. She had come home from school and discovered the apartment's sliding glass door open. When she went inside, she found Deborah dead in her nightclothes, lying in a pool of blood. Since they had no phone, Cheryl ran to the nearest phone booth to call her mother. Jean said she dropped everything and rushed home. When she arrived, she went straight inside, found her oldest daughter as Cheryl had described, and immediately called the police. When Baltimore County officers arrived, they were met with a brutal scene. Deborah had been stabbed multiple times and had also suffered blunt force trauma to her upper body. The apartment had also been ransacked, but nothing of significance was missing. According to investigators, there were no signs of robbery or sexual assault. Whatever happened to Deborah, it didn't appear to fit the pattern of a random burglary gone wrong. It appeared more personal than that. In the days that followed, investigators began interviewing people in Deborah's life and canvassing the area around the apartment. They also administered a number of polygraph tests, but no person of interest was ever 100% verified. Witnesses, however, did report one detail that has stayed with the case all this time. That morning, someone reported seeing a suspicious blue Chevy van parked outside the family's home. The van reportedly had an ILA sticker on it. To this day, neither the van nor its driver has ever been publicly identified. In 1993, Jean's youngest daughter, Cheryl, the same little sister who had come home from school and discovered Deborah, was killed in a car accident. She left behind 3 children, who Jean says have carried her through everything since. There's also one strange detail Jean has shared over the years that I think is worth mentioning. Deborah was buried at Arbutus Memorial Park, and Jean said that for years, whenever the family would visit her grave, it appeared someone else had been there too, but they've never figured out who it was. For decades, it seemed like Deborah's case might just be one more name lost to time, but thanks to advances in DNA technology and a renewed effort by the Baltimore County Police Department's Cold Case Unit, that may finally be changing. In 2025, a new detective was assigned to the case and has been working to send the original evidence out for retesting, hoping that today's forensic capabilities can pull something from items that in 1976 had no way of being meaningfully tested. If you lived in or visited the Woodlawn area in April of 1976, if you remember a blue Chevy van with an ILA sticker, or if anyone in your life has ever said something that made you wonder, the Baltimore County Police Department wants to hear from you. You can call them at 410-887-3943, or you can text the tip line at 443-862-9426. After 50 years, even the smallest detail could be the thing that finally brings Jean Hayes the answer she has waited a lifetime for. Deborah Scott was found murdered on April 26, 1976, and as of May 2026, her killer has never been identified, and this case remains unsolved. On the afternoon of May 17, 1965, in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Cumberland, Maryland, 33-year-old Jean Welch carried a basket of wet laundry into her backyard to hang it on the clothesline. It was a beautiful spring day, warm enough that she had traded her winter clothes for shorts. She had no idea that someone was watching her. Within hours, Jean would be dead, found by her own 13-year-old daughter, and 60 years later, no one has ever been arrested for her murder. Jean Welch was, by every account, a beautiful young woman who didn't look anywhere near her age, let alone like the mother of 3. She lived in an apartment on Old Town Road in Cumberland with her husband, Dale Welch, who was the vice president of the Airflow Roofing and Siding Company, and her 3 daughters, 13-year-old Judy Woodson, who was Jean's daughter from a prior marriage, 2-year-old Loy Lee, and 1-year-old Dee Dee. By all outward appearances, the Welch family was living a quiet and comfortable life. On the afternoon of the murder, Dale left for the Cumberland Country Club around noon to play a round of golf. Jean, meanwhile, stayed home with her 2 youngest daughters, while her older daughter, Judy, was at school. According to a witness, Jean was seen hanging laundry on the clothesline behind her apartment at around 1:30 p.m. That witness had no idea, but they were almost certainly the last person, other than her killer, to ever see Jean alive. The Welch family lived on the first floor of a small apartment building with 2 more apartments on the second floor. That afternoon, only one of the second-floor neighbors was home, and unfortunately, she didn't see anything unusual. But she did hear something. She had heard a knock on the Welch's side door, the door that opened onto New Hampshire Avenue. That side door was the one most often used by family and friends, not by strangers or solicitors. Across the street, neighbors were sitting on their front porch, enjoying the day and watching traffic go by. They didn't see anyone approach the front door of Jean's apartment, but they did notice one strange thing in retrospect. When Jean was outside hanging laundry, the drapes covering the large picture window of her apartment had been wide open. However, by 3 p.m., somebody had pulled them shut. It was odd enough that on a day like that, the neighbors had remembered it, but they never saw who closed them. Around 4 p.m., Judy arrived home from school. As soon as she walked into the apartment, she could tell something was wrong. The place was a mess, which was unusual because Jean was a meticulous housekeeper. Judy walked through the apartment looking for her mother and found 1-year-old Dee Dee strapped into her training potty in the back bedroom and 2-year-old Loy Lee crying. She called out, "Mom," but there was no answer. So she made her way to the closed bathroom door, but once again, nothing. That's when she opened it and witnessed something no 13-year-old girl should ever have to witness. Her mother, Jean, was lying face down in the bathtub, partially filled with water. Meanwhile, Dale was just finishing his round of golf around 4:15 p.m. and getting into his car to head back to the office when his two-way car radio crackled to life with a message that there was, and I quote, an emergency at his home. He rushed back to the apartment where police were already on the scene. Officers led him inside, showed him his wife's body, and then took him to where his daughters were and began questioning him. However, the full extent of Gene's injuries would not become apparent until the Allegany County medical examiner arrived. What they found was that Gene had been struck multiple times with a blunt instrument, but the murder weapon was nowhere to be found. After beating her, the killer had strangled Gene with a drapery cord, almost certainly the cord from those very drapes the neighbors noticed had been pulled shut. Then the killer pushed her face down into the bathtub to drown her. Her time of death was estimated at around 2 p.m., not long after she was last seen out at the clothesline. The investigation that followed was massive, especially for a city the size of Cumberland. Because of the violence of the crime, a multi-agency team was formed that included the Cumberland Police, the Allegany County Medical Examiner's Office, and the Maryland State's Attorney's Office. At the peak of the investigation, at least 10 officers were assigned full-time, and within just 1 week, more than 300 people had been interviewed. Detectives stopped cars on Old Town Road during the time window of the murder, asking drivers if they had seen anything. Neighbors got involved too. According to the Cumberland Evening Times, residents along Old Town Road were so cooperative that many of them cut their lawns and trimmed their hedges, hoping it might help police find the murder weapon. The Cumberland Sewer Department cleaned out catch basins and storm drains around the apartment. Officers searched trash cans, a nearby lake, and construction sites, but unfortunately, the murder weapon was never found. As is almost always the case in a homicide like this, suspicion immediately turned to Dale, but he had an airtight alibi. He'd been at the Cumberland Country Club playing golf with several other men, all of whom backed up his story. When investigators brought in a Maryland State Police polygraph examiner to test some of the key witnesses in the case, Dale volunteered to be tested himself, hoping to clear his name. He passed not one, but 2 separate polygraph tests with no indication that he had any knowledge of his wife's death. For the police, that was enough, but for some people in Cumberland, the rumors never fully went away. Despite the manpower and the man-hours, the crime scene itself was reportedly mishandled on day 1. Blood samples and fingerprints were lost during processing. The case remained stalled until the early 2000s, when something happened that almost broke this case wide open. According to sources familiar with the case, an under-the-radar investigation by the state's attorney's office reportedly identified forensic evidence that pointed to a living family member as a possible suspect in Gene's murder. But despite that finding, no one was ever indicted, and the case was not officially reopened. To this day, it remains in the Maryland State Police's cold case file. But if you or anyone you know has information regarding the murder of Gene Welch, please call the Maryland State Police at 410-768-7388. Gene was murdered on May 17, 1965, and as of May 2026, no one has ever been arrested, and this case remains unsolved.